Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's daily update. And in today's edition, we're going to focus on the situation, of course, in the Gaza Strip. U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio is currently visiting Israel for meetings. He met already with the Prime Minister and others. Where is this currently heading to? Naturally, the Trump administration is very keen to see the 21-point plan of President Trump bear fruit, but of course, many hurdles along the way. The situation in Lebanon continues to be very volatile. On the one hand, we do have the president of Lebanon, President Aoun, very keen on seeing the American efforts to reform the country and bring about also peace or potential normalization with Israel into a state of affairs. But nonetheless, there are challenges vis-a-vis Iran's proxy there, Hezbollah, which maintains very much its power over much of that country, and we'll have to evaluate whether or not we can be optimistic with the latest discourse with regard to Lebanon, despite repeated statements coming out of the office of Tom Barrack, the U.S. Special Envoy to Syria, also somewhat Lebanon, and ambassador to Turkey, who said that unless Lebanon takes itself in its own hands, Israel may have to intervene once more. Where is this heading? The situation in Syria, of course, continues to be very dire in the southern parts of Syria, particularly in the besieged areas of Sueda, where Druze and Christians are facing a true humanitarian catastrophe. We'll try and evaluate the situation there. And last but not least, the Islamic Republic of Iran defiantly states that it will not divert its attention to diplomacy with the United States unless the Americans alter their whole policy towards the Ayatollah regime, which is apparently the victim in this context, in their perspective, of course. But before all that, let's turn to introduce our experts for today, to include Mr. Amir Oren, our TV7 editor-at-large, retired Colonel Abbas Dahouk, formerly the military attaché to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the American military attaché, that is, and among other senior officials as a senior advisor of the State Department and elsewhere, DOD, or today DOW, as we may call it. And last but not least, Brigadier General in Reserve, Doron Gavish, commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense. It's great to see all three of you. And Mr. Oren, let's start with the visit by Secretary Rubio. What can you tell us on the latest?
So earlier today, Secretary Rubio visited the Civil Military Coordination Center set up in the Israeli southern town of Kiryat Gat. And he was accompanied by Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of the Central Command, CENTCOM, as well as by Lieutenant General Patrick Frank, who is the commanding general of ARCENT, the army component of CENTCOM, but is also dual-headed as the superior officer at CMCC, the coordination center, where there are supposed to be some 200 U.S. military servicemen, along with partner nation representatives, British and others, as they are going about their task of forming the headquarters or the organizational framework for the International Stabilization Force. Now, as Secretary Rubio said, there are still engagements with various nations willing to contribute forces, but yet there is no decision about whether it will be under United Nations auspices, as the domestic law in several countries demands. What will be the rules of engagement? Who will fund the operation? How will it be sustained? All of this is being worked out, but with a positive view to sustaining the ceasefire agreement, which is less than 2 weeks old. And up to now, except for certain incidents, has held up, but should advance, lest it starts to decline. If there's no progress, there are problems.
Well, irrespective of progress, there are a lot of problems that currently are challenging the fulfillment, at least even of phase one, let alone phase two of this 20 or 21-point plan. Colonel Dahouk, the Islamist Hamas continues to drag its feet when we're talking about returning the bodies of hostages who were murdered in Hamas captivity. 13 bodies remain to date, which is already less than 2 weeks, but nonetheless almost 2 weeks delay from the point in time in which Hamas committed to return those bodies. All the while, the Islamist organization, a foreign terrorist organization designated as such by the United States, the European Union, and other uh, countries and institutions around the world, continues to defy any statements that relate to its disarming. It seems like it fully comprehends the reality in which its own disarmament would actually render it uh, irrelevant within the context of the so-called mukawama or the resistance, which is the core foundation of what it stands for and the structure on which it is built.
Well, that's pretty good. I mean, it is Hamas is part of the obviously a big part of the this fragile ceasefire, and they do have, unfortunately, even though it's a terrorist organization, they do have a veto power, or at least they have a destabilization factor in everything. On the U.S. side, just like we mentioned, the U.S. is very much diplomatically committed all the way, and also you can see on the military side by appointing the arson commander as the head of this civil military coordinating committee. That tells you how much the Department of War or President Trump is so adamant that they want this thing to move forward and succeed. But as you know, Hamas is, if they disarm, that means that they are defeated, and their mindset is two-dimensional, either victory or martyrship. So it's very hard to reconcile with them. But there are U.S. have dealt with missions like this, where you have to disarm a certain organizations. You have to also reintegrate them into the society and disengage with them. So there are some programs probably now they introduce to the table by perhaps put some amnesty conditions for them, perhaps also buy some weapons. But at the end of the day, all of you know that Hamas is not willing to relinquish its power. The way I see it, Hamas already started phase two themselves. They already reestablishing their power within Gaza. They're trying to look at any opposition within ranks, and as you saw a week ago, they're basically terminating them. So it's very fragile ceasefire, very tense, transition. We'll just, like say, the devil in the details. We'll see how much teeth this international stabilization force has, what kind of authority they have, what kind of rules of engagement. So we'll have to wait and see.
Well, of course, they started phase two with hampering its credibility on the ground, as you mentioned, murdering many opposition figures, people who were vocal against Hamas over the reality in which this terrorist organization has ultimately brought about all this devastation in the Gaza Strip. But General Gavish, when we're looking at the alternative, as President Trump and his team were asked time and again, what leverage do you have over Hamas? And the answer always was, well, if they don't play ball, if they don't disarm, there's going to be dire consequences. They'll be obliterated, utilizing that word more than once. In embracing that statement, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has already ordered the IDF to prepare for a scenario in which Hamas fails to live up to its end of the deal. Whether or not this would be ultimately implemented is irrelevant. The IDF seems to be preparing for such a scenario, or is it? General?
Well, that's would be very unfortunate, but we would have to prepare ourselves for that. This was said by President Trump and also by Prime Minister Netanyahu from day one. And when this initiative came out, the Hamas have one option to go on and to be part of what we are seeing now, or to oppose it, and they will bear the consequences. So for sure, Israel have this capability. I don't think that anyone wants to go back to this point. But this is for sure something which is realistic. So this is what the IDF is doing. It is preparing itself also for such an event that we would have to use our powers, our power in the Gaza Strip against the Hamas. I think, you know, when we're looking at the Hamas, there is one thing that we must remember. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They are behaving always like a terrorist organization. They are pushing the boundaries. They are doing anything in order to gain their goals, and they always will do it in a let's put it as an understatement, but in an unpolite way. They would do it their way, and if they can trick everyone, this is exactly what they would do. We see it also with what is happening with the returning of those that are still dead, unfortunately, but in their captivity. I'll give you an example why I don't believe them. For example, one good example is that there is a colonel, an Israeli colonel, who is still there. His body was not returned to Israel. I'm sure, I have no doubt that they didn't lost this body. I'm sure that they know exactly where it is, and it is not back in Israel. So very challenging Hamas. It's not that we didn't know it, and I think that they must know, as others, that when the Israeli forces and the United States overall is saying that this option is a valid one, then it is a valid one. Unfortunate, we don't want to use it, but it's a valid one.
Absolutely. Let's hope for good and try and remain optimistic when we're talking about this. I will point out that with regard to Hamas murdering also Palestinian civilians, just to signal its grip on power, trying to reassert its dominance throughout the Palestinian enclave. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, spoke last night at the UN Security Council, during the course of which he asked a valid question. Were all those protesters who were so vehement in their outcry for the Palestinian people and poor Palestinian civilians throughout the Gaza Strip for the past couple of years, where are they now? It seems like the silence is truly deafening when it comes to that. But let's redirect our attention now to Lebanon, where we saw yesterday the Israeli Air Force and military once again launching intelligence-directed strikes against multiple Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. Mr. Oren brought in our understanding on what happened there exactly, and to what degree is Hezbollah really ratcheting up its efforts to prepare for a potentially new round of violence with Israel.
So the difference between Lebanon and Gaza, or Hezbollah and Hamas, is that in the Gaza case, because of President Trump's personal involvement, his prestige at stake, one may use the hackneyed expression, too big to fail, vis-a-vis Gaza. Trump is not going to let the Gaza plan just collapse. But in Lebanon, the stakes are smaller. Hezbollah still has a lot of firepower. Yes, perhaps the majority of its long-range and medium-range missiles and rockets is already gone, but they still have a lot to harass Israel. They know that should they start anything, they will be, as you and President Trump love to use the word, they will be obliterated. So right now, this is still a domestic issue in Lebanese politics, plus an American and to some extent French and UN involvement. But Israel is making sure that Hezbollah, once it is raising its head in any region of Lebanon, of course, adjacent to the border primarily, but anywhere in the Bekaa Valley, if any operative comes forward to set up a safe room, to store weapons for some contingency. When Israel finds about it, it strikes. It doesn't mean that Hezbollah will change its calculus and try to attack Israel, because they don't have the Radwan force right across the border from Israel, which was the biggest danger, and that they know that Israel is lying in ambush, just waiting for them for such a mistake in judgment.
Indeed. Well, let's not forget that post October 7th, 2023, on October 8th of 2023, the Iranian proxy Hezbollah joined the fight against Israel in an attempt to force Israel to split its various divisions and not immediately going and obliterating Hamas as was initially expected. Regrettably, a day after that, on October 9th, which we remember, of course, quite closely, the deputy commander of 300, Brigade 300, the Lieutenant Colonel Alim Abdullah, a Druze officer who was actually supposed to conclude his service merely 2-3 days later, was killed, the first one to be killed in an exchange with Hezbollah, leaving behind a lovely wife and 3 children, including just a newborn. So it's just remembering how those things evolved up to now. Hezbollah doesn't seem to want to capitulate, nor do the Iranians at that. They are heavily battered. Their leadership is decapitated, but nonetheless, it's very much alive and kicking and trying to rearm and prepare itself for a new round. Colonel Dahouk, what can you tell us about, from a Lebanese perspective in this context and an American perspective, to the whole equation that we're talking about right now?
Well, I mean, from the American perspective, it seems like the administration put all their efforts on this through the envoy, envoy Barak and Ortegas, and have done everything they could to have the Lebanese government acknowledge that they need to disarm Hezbollah, and the Lebanese government has acknowledged it. There is a plan, and there is also a deadline at the end of the year to disarm them. But it seems that at this point, it's all just talk and no action. I mean, there's still the Lebanese president still calling on the United States and France to perhaps stop the Israelis interfering or from their perspective breaking that ceasefire. But despite that, I think from the U.S. perspective, the onus now on the Lebanese government. They need to do more. The president of Lebanon, he was the commander of the armed forces, and he witnessed all this, the rise of Hezbollah. He witnessed all these strategic missiles that came through Iran, from Syria to Lebanon, through their borders, and done nothing about it. And now he's the president of Lebanon. He's the civilian authority over the military to do more. And I haven't done much yet. So it's up to the Lebanese to do so. And if they're not, I think Israel, after October 7th, as you mentioned, they're not going to take any risk anymore. So if they see a threat somewhere, whether it's in Gaza or maybe in Lebanon, they have to go out and seek it out. So Lebanon has to do more. But last comment on the Rus kernel that you mentioned. I mean, to me, it's amazing that you see the Israelis, or the Jewish Israelis, the Arab Israelis, and the Druze Israelis are in the same trench fighting against terrorist organizations, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah. Those terrorist organizations, the Arab world also acknowledge that they are terrorist organizations, yet they don't see this camaraderie of fight and this effort against it.
Sadly, they see it, but they don't acknowledge it, since they have their own political interests. And of course, within totalitarian regimes, in most cases, there is a messaging problem towards their own people. Much disinformation. Many Druze, Arabs, Christians, Muslims even, are fighting in the IDF. And let's not forget that there were many Muslim Arabs and Bedouins that were taken hostage by the Islamist Hamas on October 7th. Some of them were also murdered in the process. And that is, of course, not something that is being highlighted by any of them, let alone those countries that supposedly support the Islamist Hamas for ideological reasons, Qatar namely, as well as Turkey, among others. But General Gavish, yesterday we heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at an event of the Israel Security Agency, the Shin Bet, the Internal Security Agency, coming out and stating Jerusalem closely monitors the various enemies and is very clear-eyed about their efforts to rearm themselves and prepare to harm Israel. And Israel will not stand idly by in allowing that to happen once again. What are we to take into account when we're talking specifically about Lebanon? But let's not forget, when we're talking about Lebanon in this context, we're talking about Hezbollah, which is effectively an extension of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Well, you're right, Jonathan, and allowing me to concur with what was just said by Abbas, that Israel cannot allow its enemies to grow and to be very effective in tackling them before they are growing. I think that, and we talked about it more than once. When we look at the Israeli national strategy, there is a new pillar that was added, even if we didn't do it officially, and this is the prevention one. Israel is going to prevent, this is the state of mind in Israel after 7th of October, to prevent our enemies to grow to a strategic threat toward Israel. And I think we see it on the statement of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I think that we see it also by the behavior of Israel to our neighbors around us. With regard to the Hezbollah, I truly hope that everyone around us and everyone in the world understand that Israel is fighting the Hezbollah, and it is not fighting the Lebanese people, it is not fighting the Lebanese government. On contrary, it is in a way helping, we don't make it loud, to the Lebanese government. So with regard to the Hezbollah and also in Syria, I think that Israel have to maintain this strategy. This is something very important, and also you've mentioned before, for us, The Druze community here in Israel, this is a part of us. They are contributing to the defense of Israel. They are part of the IDF. They have high-rank senior officers as part of the IDF and also of the Israeli society, our government, and so on. That they are embedded into our society. And once their brothers are being slaughtered in the other side of the border, we cannot just look at it. It is quite amazing, to see that Israel is the only country in the world that at the end of the day is coming and supporting the Druze from being slaughtered in Syria. So different from what is being discussed all over the world about genocide and things like this. So I think we have to continue with this policy. This is exactly what was reflected from the speech of Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday.
Thank you, General Gavish. Unfortunately, we don't have time left to delve deeper into the situation in Sweden, but I will highlight once again, the Damascus regime is besieging the territory of Sweden, where you have roughly between 550 to 600,000 Druze and Christians living there side by side under very tough conditions. Right now, there is a drought that is plaguing all of Syria, also beyond Syrian territory. But this drought is also not only affecting the dire situation in Sweden, the humanitarian aid that is being trickled down is now being utilized by the Damascus regime as a tool of warfare, which is outrageous. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to immediately thank our panelists, to include General Gavish, Colonel Dahouk, and Mr. Oren, and to thank all of you at home as well, and wish you a Shabbat Shalom until our next edition. From here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel, and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.